course. Right. Well,
that's okay. Well, welcome to another edition of Resistance Reads. Matt's setting the scene in the background over here.
He's closing the door.
Just closing the door. Yeah, so we're not hearing the terrifying sounds of birds chirping in your lovely location.
Well, it's a Sunday morning, so there might be like gardening that happens or something like that.
And walks of shame.
Oh, absolutely. Walks of shame. Yes. I think we all do that from time to time.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So this time we took a bit of a different approach. The last several books have all been really about politics and power and economics and climate change. But this time we took a little more of I don't know what you call it. I guess it's not a subtle approach, but a different tact on the commentary of power and resistance.
Yeah.
And covered the book Passing.
Yes.
By Nella Larsen, which is a phenomenal book.
Phenomenal read. Absolutely. Can't recommend it enough.
It is about two women who are both mixed race in 1927, because I mentioned the year 1927.
That's right.
So they're mixed race, I guess 1927 and 1928, because the book ends after the new year.
Oh no, there's a 2-year gap in between the beginning.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
So it was written in it was published in 1929, but initially set in 27 and ends in I think in 29 as well, Christmas of 1929.
Okay. Yeah. So and this book is basically about the nature of power resistance in identity and how do you manage a deeply racist and problematic society when you yourself don't fit into either category neatly.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
So so that's the book. And since it was Matt's choice, we have to also do a disclaimer here.
Yes, definitely.
There is a lot of racial slurs in this book. We are not going to use as two white men.
No.
Most of those racial slurs.
Right.
There is one exception. And that is because A, it was supposed to be the original title of the book.
Yeah.
And B, it's also like an important kind of, it's used by a deeply racist husband against his wife who he doesn't know is mixed race.
Exactly. Yeah.
As kind of a pet name in a weird, very twisted, and I think the author is very in your face about this kind of thing.
Absolutely.
But that word is Nig, N-I-G.
Yeah.
And that was Nella Larsen, as Matt was telling me earlier, originally wanted that to be the title of the book.
Yes.
But her publisher wouldn't let her.
Right. So Nella Larsen, for anybody who doesn't know, and I imagine there are a lot of people out there who don't know who she is. She was a jazz age novelist who wrote 2 really well-received books and some short stories. Some under her married name, but mostly with her maiden name. She lived in jazz age Harlem, which was kind of like a little enclave of like black wealth and culture, and that's where like jazz was born, kind of concurrently with blues in Chicago and in New Orleans, and it was like a very vibrant cultural space, but it did exist in like a little enclave in the most powerful city in the most powerful country. Well, I guess actually America wasn't like a supreme power at that point.
No.
Not until after World War II, I guess.
Right. I mean, this is a really interesting, and I was just actually rereading this Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed, which talks about the history of like armed rebellion, resistance, and community defense force from the Reconstruction era to the late 1970s, basically. And the guy who wrote it, he was very much involved in the civil rights movement and stuff. But, talking about the post-First World War period, you started to see some significant changes in the discussions surrounding race. And of course, you had like really powerful and important figures like W.E.B. Du Bois, who were stepping up and really kind of changing the kind of conversations people were having. You saw, a lot of people kind of beginning to reject the racist approach, this pseudoscientific approach to racism. Like, these ideas that people were they were trying to use racism to justify, but it also like the 1920s, super important to remember. This is kind of the height of the American eugenics movement.
Yeah.
It's also the beginning of forced sterilization. I think it was like by the 1932, there was something like already 25,000 forced sterilizations, and it wasn't specifically focused just on any one particular race or group. Is really anyone who wasn't kind of like middle class to upper class white.
It was the classist thing as well as a racist thing.
Right.
But like you said last night, classism and racism go hand in hand.
They've never been separated.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the entire concept of our modern concept of race was created post Bacon's rebellion to kind of divide and conquer the poor, so the wealthy elites and the landholders could essentially maintain power, right?
Yeah,
so
reference once again how the Irish became white.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So, or Birth of a White Nation is another good one by Jacqueline Badalora. Or the New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander. All of these ones very much cover these concepts. So it's important to understand. I mean, I think it was 1922, there were 32 official eugenics record offices in the United States where people would go to register their human pedigrees.
Damn.
So this is the era in which Nella Larsen is writing.
Yeah.
It's between world wars. America's in this weird kind of transitionatory period. They're still kind of isolationist, even though they participated.
Yeah.
You just actually, not too long ago, got out of the 1918 pandemic, which actually, there was a lot of, like, racist conspiracies.
Hence the Spanish flu.
Yeah. You know, there's also kind of conversation. This is kind of the beginning of the time when you start to have conversations of who gets to be white and who doesn't, which you kind of see in the subtext of this book.
Absolutely.
You know, so understanding the history of the early 20th century is really key to understanding the
I think
nuances
also
of this book.
The cultural history of the 20th century is really important to this too, because one, Harlem at this time is kind of the center of cool before we had a word for it. So we had a lot of white, like rich white folk would come up to Harlem to experience the art that was there. Like painting was flourishing, writing was flourishing, and music especially was flourishing. So people would come to dance clubs and like mix with black folk, and that was kind of edgy and cool, but also it was a transgression, I suppose is how you want to put it. And Nella Larsen, as a person of mixed race, who was married to a black physicist, the second black physicist to get a PhD in the country, or maybe just from Harvard. But in any case, like an upper class guy, she came from more humble beginnings, and so she never felt like she was part of the like black intelligentsia that was kind of like Langston Hughes was kind of at the forefront of that, and she didn't feel really accepted in like kind of poor black culture because she was married to a rich man, and she didn't feel accepted by the white culture because she wasn't fully white either. So in passing, now we'll finally get to the plot of the book.
Let's get to the summary.
Yeah.
Huge, by the way, this is one of those books, there's not even really a denouement. It's just like, let's gonna throw you.
Oh, absolutely.
It ends at the climax.
It does.
And it is a mind fuck.
It's a punchy fucking book.
It's a punchy fucking book.
It's a tight 120 pages, and it packs a bunch in there. So it's split up into 3 sections, and the first section is it starts with Irene, who is the, I guess, ostensible protagonist, the narrator of the book. She's in Chicago visiting. That's where she's from, but she lives in New York. But she's visiting for a little while, and she's out shopping for her kids. And it's a thing that she's kind of procrastinated on. And you'll find that procrastination is one of her main characteristics. But she's out in the summer in Chicago. It's too hot. And she sees a guy faint on the sidewalk, and she feels faint herself. So she hops in a cab and gets taken to, I think as she puts it, a hotel almost as nice as the nicest hotels in New York, the Draymond, I believe. And the cabbie takes her there because she asks for a cool place to have some tea. And he says that the rooftop at the Draymond always has a breeze. So she goes there and she's just enjoying her solitude and she's like reflecting on her past. And this woman, this beautiful woman, sits down next to her and she's like, oh, my peace is going to be spoiled because this woman and her boyfriend are going to start chattering. But the man excuses himself fairly quickly, and she finds that the woman who's just sat down is looking at her very intently, and she can't really understand why until the woman approaches her and is like, Reen, oh my God, it's so nice to see you. And she can't place her because this woman is so changed from the girl Claire that she knew when she was growing up, who was a year younger than her and had a very sad childhood. Her father dies in a saloon brawl, and she has to go live with her aunts, who are white but mean to her, basically do a Cinderella thing. And she's so taken aback because the woman is so beautiful and so changed from how she knew her, and she can't stop thinking about how beautiful Claire is, which I think is kind of a happy accident given that it's June. And there's definitely queer subtext or maybe just text in this book. The thing about this book is you can read it a bunch of different ways.
There's a lot of, and we were talking about this just before we got on live here.
Yeah.
There's so many dualities here.
So many.
And there's also like, you know, I'm thinking about it now, and I kind of think that Irene is a little bit of an unreliable narrator.
I think that Irene is absolutely an unreliable narrator because I think she's suppressing a lot of aspects of her own personality.
Right, and you could definitely take this, like, there's definitely kind of a queerness feeling. Mm-hmm. The way that she constantly is like mooning over Claire and how beautiful, and looking at her lips
and her dark eyes.
Her dark eyes, yeah. her beautiful eyes, and her
suggestive mouth.
Suggested mouth, on, like man. Literally using the word suggestive mouth. Like yeah. There's definitely kind of like this sense. And I like going into it, I was like, wait, is she in love with her? Is that what this book's going to be about? And it's not what it's really about.
Not really, yeah.
But you can definitely read that way. And you said that the movie leans a little bit more into that.
Yeah, the movie apparently takes like most of the husband stuff out of it. I think a lot of it collapses some characters.
Okay.
And
which is often what movies and shows do.
Kind of have to, yeah. Just given the format. Yeah. You gotta, I think when you're doing an adaptation, I think it is smart to pick out one aspect of the work that you're adapting and like focus on it, because if you try to do a true to the text adaptation, you're going to make a mini series, and at that point why not just read the book,
right?
You know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they get to talking, and Claire's being kind of coy and wants Irene to ask about her and what's happened to her since she had to go away and live with her aunts, and then just kind of disappeared. And we find in the narration, as Irene is reflecting during the conversation, that when Claire left, there were a bunch of rumors circulated in the neighborhood about what had happened to her. Mm-hmm. People had saw her in different places, like in the park, in a carriage, like being driven about, in a rich way. Basically, that's kind of indicating fanciness, or like at a Marshall Fields, which is like apparently a very famous Chicago department store that kind of like pioneered merchandising in the way that we understand it now. So very high-end department store, and as Claire put it, the girl that saw her there cut her dead, which is apparently when you just don't acknowledge a social acquaintance in a context where you're not expecting to see them.
Right.
And so they have this exchange, and throughout it, Irene is kind of engaging and withdrawing, like alternately, almost like, I don't want to say psychotically, but like she keeps on vacillating is what she's doing in her feelings towards Claire and how much she wants to be around her, and like the gaze that she's seeing her with. And so this all kind of ends up in Irene being sort of like shanghaied into another party at Claire's house.
A Tuesday.
On a Tuesday. And
And Claire like calls her and calls her and calls her.
Yes.
She just will not give up trying to get a hold of Irene.
Irene is able to make her excuses in the moment by being like, "Oh, I'm just booked up. My social card is all filled out. I can't do anything."
And she's like, Irene, come see me.
Yeah, until I get back from the lake or whatever. And so she goes to Claire's her hotel that she's staying at because she and her husband are in town on business. And she meets another person from the neighborhood there who's married to a butcher. She's also mixed race, but her husband is white and doesn't care, like, as far as we can tell. And apparently his mother is super nice to Gertrude, the woman there for tea as well. And they get into conversation about being mixed race and what it's like. But then Claire's husband stops in, and he is racist as fuck. He won't stop talking about black people.
How much she's like, so you don't, like, Irene is like, so you don't like black people? He's like, no. I hate them. Like, and he doesn't realize he's married to a mixed race person.
Because she has been passing this whole time. That's how she got out of her situation, was passing as white because she had white aunts who were very religious and kind of like, she could use that as the reason that they would object to her getting married. And so she eloped with Jack when she was 18, when she turned 18. And so Jack can't stop bringing up how much he hates black people in conversation. The conversation turns to South Africa, and he's like, oh man, it would be so great if they just got all the black people out of there. He definitely uses the N-word the whole time. We're saying black people because we don't want to say the N-word. But he addresses, the first thing he says when he walks into the room is Nick, because that's his pet name for his wife. But Gertrude and Irene just like,
they freeze.
They're like, what? Oh, no, he knows, And then, like, the whole time Claire is sort of being coy about the fact that she invited her friends to have tea with her, knowing that her husband was going to stop in and treat them this way. And Irene doesn't know how to feel about this. She's like, is she is she trying to show me how desperate her situation is? Or is she flaunting her situation, living rich and white with this terrible man in front of me? And she's just kind of perplexed about it. And I think she even says later in the narration, I just never knew how to feel about that.
Yeah.
And so when she and Gertrude finally make their way out of there, they have a quick conversation where Gertrude's like, I would never have done that. Like, I, of course, told Fred immediately that I was mixed race when he proposed to me, or even when we started dating, I think is what she says.
Yeah.
And I would never have pulled the wool over his eyes that way because I respect him and he loves me. And I think that's a very telling moment, to be honest. I think Gertrude, if just to digress a moment, I think Gertrude's living the most honest way a person could as a mixed race person in that time, because she can, for public-facing appearances, working in a butcher shop, pass herself off as a white lady and not face the scrutiny of like the legal system that would have persecuted her for it.
Right.
But all of the people that it's important for them to know who she is really know and love her and accept her, and they love that about her even. Which is, I think, another great allegory to queerness, actually, now that we're talking about it just reminds me of an episode of Ted Lasso in the third season that you should probably watch.
He keeps telling me I need to watch.
Yeah, I watched Ted Lasso. It's freaking good, man. But that's the end of their first encounter. And the chapters are actually titled Encounter, Re-encounter, and Finale.
Yeah.
And so the re-encounter happens 2 years later when, after going back to Europe, Claire comes back to New York, again on business, this time kind of against her husband's will, I think. Or maybe that was the first time.
She was kind of sneaking around a lot in the book. It was like every time her husband was out, because her husband goes to Canada at one point.
He stays in Canada for a long time. You're right. Like the whole time she's in New York, he's in Canada.
Right, because so she just like disappears from her home in Chicago. I don't even know what happens to her daughter.
Her daughter is in the school in Switzerland.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Which is where they live, I think, because he's a banking guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So she comes back when her husband kind of gives her an excuse by going to Canada. She comes back to New York, looks Irene up again, and kind of pesters her into like socializing with her again. But basically, the second that Claire enters her dressing room, the second time she's like Irene just feels herself like melting. And she's like happy that she's back again, and again won't stop thinking about how beautiful she is. And Claire introduces herself by kissing Irene on her shoulder, which is bared because she's getting dressed. And um, we'll just leave that there.
And there's a lot of moments when Claire kisses Irene in various kind of intimate circumstances, which kind of gives you this kind of subtext of like, what is Irene thinking about this? Is Irene emphasizing so much of this because there's a part of her identity she's suppressing?
Are these casual, affectionate like gestures, or do they mean something more? And is Irene just focusing on them because that's how she do?
Yeah.
But throughout the sojourn in Claire's sojourn in New York, she's kind of like being buffeted and then accepted by Irene. And Irene becomes more and more abstracted in her relationship with her husband, who this whole time, we find out, I think in this chapter, at the beginning of this chapter, that he had always wanted to move to Brazil. He, as a light-skinned but clearly not passing like black man who is a professional, he's a doctor, but anytime he mentions being a doctor, he talks about how much he hates it. Wanted to move to Brazil. I'm assuming to pursue a more adventurous life, but also because it's so ethnically mixed down there.
Yeah, I was looking back up after our conversation last night, that there was at this time 134 different categories for racial identity in Brazil.
Okay, wow.
So the segregation of society was far different. Mixing was far more encouraged in a lot of South America, but specifically Brazil.
Yeah.
And the Portuguese were not. I mean, the Portuguese did some pretty awful stuff. Let's not beat around the bush.
Oh, absolutely.
But like, they were not as like interested in the racial distinctions as, say, like the English and the French and the Germans.
Right.
And so I think his perception is that moving to Brazil, we could have a better life for our family, because they have 2 kids.
Yes.
And one is passing. Mm-hmm. One is definitely not.
Yes, and that was actually part of the discussion at the tea party, where they're talking about being mixed race, is that Gertrude had twins who were both passing. Claire has one daughter who is also passing, but Irene has one of each, basically. And they were talking about the fear of being pregnant and how they would turn out. Yeah. And Irene definitely took umbrage the whole time during that conversation, because as far as she's concerned, she loves her sons equally. But one of the things you detect throughout the story is that she's not really willing to engage in what the consequences are for someone who isn't passing. Her husband can't pass for white, and one of her sons, I think Theodore, can't pass for white.
Right. Junior can.
And at certain points throughout the novel, especially in the last 2 sections, she and her husband get into conversation, I should say,
it's an argument.
Conflicts about whether it's even acceptable to talk about Jim Crow and the nature of bigotry in New York.
And lynching.
Lynching is one of the things. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And so that is, I think, at the source of their tension. But throughout, even from the beginning, even in the Chicago chapter, Irene thinks that she can read and steer her husband's thoughts and emotions and moods. And that illusion of hers slowly starts to degrade over the course of the book, especially after Claire's around more. And I think Irene attributes his drifting away from her emotionally to Claire, and I'm not sure that's earned. But that's probably part of the discussion we should have later. So in New York, Claire gets herself invited to a black charity ball, and that's when she starts mixing with all of Irene's friends and acquaintances, and Irene's one white writer friend who is an analogous character to a person that Nella knew in real life. He's kind of the only one who sees through Claire, and they have a discussion about it. And he's mostly just put off by Claire's, I think, like demeanor and the way that she can kind of like draw people in around her. He just finds that a little like manipulative, but Irene definitely, I think, attributes that to him clocking her as being mixed race and like passing, doing the act of passing. And I just actually want to, for a brief moment, the intro to the book posits that in many works, the act of passing results in an inherent degradation. And to quote, the denial of the Black mother is often the surest sign of low character in those who choose to pass. I think that might be one of the theses of this book, because Nella Larsen never felt that passing was an actual viable option for her, even though she could potentially pass for white if she chose to. She felt that it was like throwing a part of yourself away. And I think that is what Irene thinks that her friend Herbert is detecting in
Hugh?
Claire. Or Hugh.
Hugh.
Herbert is the real guy. Hugh is the character. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's Hugh.
Hugh
I thought
is the Ramona Clef, if you will. Yes.
Yeah.
As Claire spends more time in New York society, in specifically Harlem society, constantly going uptown to Harlem, which Irene suggests to her when she arrives is a danger for her in her precarious situation as a white passing woman, kind of not acknowledging the fact that lots of rich white folk were doing that at that time, and kind of like engaging in and to a certain degree exploiting or shekling the culture.
It's exoticism, right?
It absolutely
it's like,
is.
oh, we're gonna do this kind of socially dangerous thing, and there's this one passage that talks about how like, oh, both the white men and the white women, they're all like enamored with the erotic other kind of thing. And so I mean that
she and Hugh have a conversation about that in that club.
Right.
Yeah, she just keeps on insinuating herself, and Irene keeps noticing these men that she respected. She thought they were like men of letters and discernment, kind of falling for Claire's, temptressy ways, as I think Irene would put it. It just sort of like you see the breakdown of their relationship, but also her relationship with a lot of the people around her. She becomes more withdrawn and morose. And then in the last chapter finale, it's basically like a couple of scenes. She has a conversation with her husband about lynching. Right after she runs into Jack on the street with her friend who does not pass. And Jack clocks that, oh wait, this girl Irene, who is a childhood friend of Claire's, is just literally arm in arm with a black woman. And Irene in this moment cuts him dead and does not acknowledge him and just moves on. And
we should also note that at this stage in the book, Irene is like done with Claire.
Yes.
And like has been thinking about
how to
sabotage, telling the husband. And then she says like at some point, it's like as if by magic he shows up the next day when I was arm in arm, but instead of doing something and sabotaging Claire, she just cuts him dead.
She just cuts him dead
and walks off.
Mm-hmm. And then just goes home, and like her friend Felice, I think, like continues her shopping. The thing that they were gonna do together, she does by herself. And Irene in her head thinks like, I couldn't do it because of loyalty. Like I could never blow up someone's spot for passing. She doesn't say it that way, but that's the gist of it. And I don't know if that's loyalty or if that's canniness, to be honest. I don't know if she like realized that all she had to do was be seen by Jack in the company of a black woman to tell on her friend, and it was accidental and she could take no blame for it.
Right.
In any case, the very last scene happens on the way to, or I should say at another party. And this whole time, actually, that Claire has been in New York, she's been spending a lot of time with Brian, Irene's husband, mostly because Irene has this terrible habit of like spending a lot of time getting ready in her room, being late basically. And so her guest will arrive and then her husband has to entertain her. Mm-hmm. And then at one moment, Brian has invited Claire over to another tea party at their house that was for Hugh. And Hugh doesn't like Claire. And so Irene kind of blows up at her. How could you? And he's like, I just invited your friend to a party you were having. I don't know what I did wrong. And immediately Irene starts thinking that he is having an affair with Claire. And that's why he told. So Irene has this in the back of her head as they're proceeding to this party at her friend's house that she was on the street with when Jack saw her. And she just keeps on noticing that Brian is looking at Claire a lot and thinking that it's because he's in love with her and that she's lost her way with him, that she's lost her control over him. Mm-hmm. And they go up to the party. It's on the 13th floor. They have to walk all the way up it because her friend Felice thinks that it will keep casual guests at bay, which I think is a hilarious reason for living in the top floor of a walk-up in New York. But Irene is just like morose at the party, sitting, not really engaging in everything that's happening, making minimal effort, laughing occasionally, that sort of thing. They've got this big open window that she opens actually to let some air in. Mm-hmm. I just realized.
Irene does, right?
Irene does, yeah. And Claire's standing by it when her husband bursts in, calls everybody the N-word, tries to start something, but the host is like, you're the only white guy here, man. I don't know what you're doing. And Irene runs over to grab Claire's arm, and as Jack is approaching simultaneously, and the next thing we know, he's saying, no, Nick, as Claire's fallen out the window to her death. And everybody rushes downstairs except Irene, who is in shock, but also cannot believe what happened, that she says that she could, for the rest of her life, she could never recall what happened in those last moments. And then she goes downstairs carrying her husband's jacket just in her arms, cradling something, is how I interpreted that, just like holding on to anything. She gets downstairs and everybody's like, oh, here's Irene. She was like, she could say what happened.
She was right next to Claire.
She was right next to Claire. She can say what happened. And Irene can't really say anything. She like just lets out a little whimper. Mm-hmm. She says she stifled a laugh and let out a whimper. And her husband puts her coat on her. And that's kind of it. The police are like, death by misadventure, I guess. We'll go look at the window. And
yeah,
that's the last line.
The last line was like, let's go look at that window.
Yeah.
And so the question is like, because, and I reread the passage several times.
Yeah.
I reread it several times.
Yeah. It's a shocking passage, by the way. It's like, it's the biggest, like, stick the landing Simone Biles style I've ever seen in a novel, maybe ever. Like, it's so shocking and so exhilarating, and it like concludes things in such a neat and also like diffuse way, because you're like, wait, what happened? Did she push her out? Did she not? Like, did she fall because she was shocked that her husband found her, or did she see her husband and jump out as a way to say fuck you? There's so many ways to interpret it, and it's just punchy, man.
Well, and you have to, I think there's another key point here you have to understand in this book, is that it kind of appears, at least in Irene's mind, as you're approaching the end of the book, that Claire is trying to take over her life. That she feels
I didn't read it that way. That's fascinating.
Well, so my interpretation is that Claire's going to move in, steal her husband, take their kids off. Maybe they'll go to, I think, she doesn't say this explicitly, but maybe they'll go to Brazil together.
She has been spending a lot of time with Brian. There's no way she wouldn't have known that Brian wanted to live in Brazil.
Right. So like, I kind of got this feeling, and so then there are these passages right before the final party where she's like, "Well, I just have to pretend that I don't know about their affair. It was good. I got to do everything I can to get rid of Claire. Like Claire can't be if Claire
That's
goes
one of her
free."
reasons for that. That's one of her reasons for not telling Jack.
Right.
After the fact. That's
Right.
one of the, when she sees him on the street, she's like, "Why didn't I tell him?" Well, it actually would be better if I didn't tell him, because if Claire is free of Jack, she can take Brian.
She can take Brian, right? So I think she fucking murdered her friend.
Okay,
interesting. I do. I think she, in the last second, panicked and pushed her friend out the window.
Okay,
I think that's what
an alternate reading that I think also holds up is that in Claire's words, all Claire wants is to live there in Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
Now that could mean literally there in that house in Harlem, or it could just mean like live a life similar to Irene's in Harlem, and she's trying to sabotage her relationship. So at one point Irene asked Claire, like, what happens if your husband finds out that you are mixed race? And she's like, well, he'll leave me, obviously, and that's okay, because all I want to do is live here and live in this environment and be free. And
she's tired of passing.
She's tired of passing. And Irene's like, what about your daughter? And she's like, she'll be fine. She lives in a boarding school. She doesn't really see her dad that often anyway. She can just continue to pass for white in Europe and be fine. And so Irene, like, it's like, well, maybe she's just trying to blow up her life. You know, maybe she's trying to, like, get out of this situation that she thought was her escape and ended up being her prison.
Mm-hmm.
And so when her husband, catches her, she's trying to get caught the whole time, but when her husband catches her and she's standing by this big open window, she just jumps out, as a big fuck you to him.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, she would be free in that sense too. There's an alternate theory that he pushed her out and that it was so shocking that Irene wasn't able to, like, wrap her mind around it. I'm not sure I buy that as much.
I don't buy it.
But he does run the fuck away.
Yeah,
he's
he
not
runs
to
away,
be found.
and then no, they can't find him. And because, like, even like, if it was Irene,
mm-hmm.
or it was her jumping out,
mm-hmm.
like, what court is gonna believe this man just found out
that his wife is mixed?
His wife is mixed. She's been lying to him the whole time.
Storms into a
party, yelling racial slurs,
and then she's dead.
Yeah. Who's gonna? I mean, that's a conviction right there.
Absolutely.
Right? So he vanishes.
It's the 1920s in the United States, so maybe he.
Even still, but he was in Harlem.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like,
yeah.
If nothing else, it would have probably destroyed his career.
Absolutely. His international baking career is all done at that point.
It's done at that point, right? Because
yeah.
his wife is suddenly dies under very conspicuous circumstances.
Yeah,
right?
and theoretically, when he gets back to Europe or Canada or whatever, if people are like, what happened to your wife? And he's like, she was mixing with a rough crowd at a party and died, in Harlem. And they're like, oh.
Yeah. So no matter what, his career is over at this point. So he, like, flees the scene.
Yeah.
But it really gives you it leaves you with nothing except for, like, holy shit, what just happened?
Yeah.
And, like, the way the book ends, like, I was like, wait a second, that can't be the last line.
Yeah.
It can't be, let's go check out that window again. Like, I was like, what the hell? So, but, like, the book is full of these kind of, like, dualisms, and I think it's such, like, when you, in a lot of ways, if you think about it, if you've been passing for so long, and you're part of the society that you're passing, and you're found out, you're socially dead.
Yeah.
Your social life and everybody you know are suddenly, you're dead to them.
Yeah, the best thing you can do is probably just leave and go somewhere else. That is kind of that's kind of how Claire starts her life, is that she just leaves just literally sneaks out of a bad situation and lands herself in a better one. Although when Irene interrogates her about that, she says that because she had white aunts that he could ask about because they had passed away or something like that. I forget what the deal was with that, but when Jack is kind of like, I don't know, maybe just doing his due diligence after he meets this pretty girl, you
Yeah.
know.
Because there was no family to ask after, because that was like a discussion they had in the
when I think
section.
when he approaches initially, the aunts are like, we're not going to tell this guy that she's mixed because that will bring shame on us because our beloved brother like slept with a black lady, you know.
Right.
But by the time like it's, you know, it would be prudent for him to ask them for her hand in marriage or whatever. She just like Claire discourages that because she is afraid that her aunts will tell him then, you know, because it's pertinent information for him to know apparently, you know. Yeah, man, the duality in this book is like it's fucking rife with it though.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, for sure.
I wrote down a couple of things, just like the rich poor element. You know, Claire coming from a like being destitute. Her father was a janitor and a surprisingly inefficient one at that. Is how Irene put it. And then she ends up marrying a ridiculously wealthy guy who struck gold in South Africa. There's also like white and black and kind of the liminal space in between that, and also passing and not passing. Now that I think about it, I feel like Irene's whole thing is being in that liminal space because she operates in black society in Harlem, but she can pass for white in any Manhattan boutique she wants to. She when she's having tea at the Draymond in Chicago, she thinks to herself, like, you know, no one would ever suspect. When Claire is staring at her, actually, and she's reflecting on, like, why is this lady looking at me so hard? Does she realize I'm black? I had to change the quote in my head there. Sorry. When does she realize I'm black? That can't be it because white people always think I'm Italian or Spanish or Mexican or Roma. Again, I changed that one because that's not PC anymore either. But yeah, she operates liminally all the time. She also is like keeping her husband in a space that he doesn't want to be because she feels like it's safe in like a liminal space. Harlem itself is liminal, you know, in Manhattan back then.
Right.
Man.
When was the founding of Black Wall Street? Do you remember?
It was around the same time. It was like
time, right?
It was like 1890 to like 1910, I think.
Right.
Yeah. It's crazy, man. Yeah, the Five Points neighborhood was the same way here in Denver. Like it was a vibrant, rich place for black entrepreneurs to do, you know, their business and for like, I mean, we got like
there was that Netflix show. I forget what it was called.
Oh, McDaniel came out of 5 Points, man. Like
yeah. There was what I can't remember what the call was. It was something. It was a show about race and racism, but it was by Killer Mike.
Oh wow, cool.
Right. So and he talked about Black Wall Streets and the complexity of segregation. He was like, "Here's the thing, segregation was bad, but at the same time." When segregation ends, all of these white businesses colonize and put out of business black businesses and actually take away black power. That there was, like, in a weird way, even though segregation was definitely bad, it like the act of segregation forced black people to have like their areas of power. And those were fractured after. And of course, on top of that, you get the drug war, you know, which Nixon very much was like, how do we stop civil rights? Oh, we conduct Nixon and Reagan. How do we do that?
Nixon,
but Reagan was a part of it.
But then later, even more mostly, Reagan.
Right, he was governor of California
of course,
during all that stuff, right? So how do we do that? We conduct the drug war. We shatter these communities. We, you know,
That's
destabilize
interesting to
the
think
area.
about. Some of the worst, like, conservative politicians of the 20th century came out of California. But yeah, no, like, I think that's the reason that, like, that Claire wants to live in Harlem is because it feels like a safe enclave for her to be around black people and feel that part of her that she's been repressing.
Right.
But Irene, I think, is secretly, like, experiencing depression because she feels like she's contained by Harlem in a way because of the life she's built there. It is safe and secure, but it is also kind of functioning like a little prison for her. And her husband is constantly expressing this. that he wants to move to a place that's more like racially diverse and like I think probably from his perspective especially celebrating all of the spectrum of like racial diversity that can exist when people like mingle and intermix and stuff like that.
But like, and also too, it is important to understand that there were a lot of racial politics in Brazil in the early 20th century. It was not.
He's probably not cognizant of that.
He's probably not. Yeah. He probably looks to the other place and thinks, I mean, yes, you don't have. I mean, like what is literally fascist terror for Black people.
Right.
Post Reconstruction is essentially, especially in the South. It is a form of fascism.
Oh, it's absolutely fascism.
Black people's rights are constantly violated.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to vote.
Mm-hmm.
All of the gains that they make in the short period right after the Civil War are suddenly stripped away from them. Not much longer after Reconstruction begins and they get the right to vote and the 14th Amendment and the 13th Amendment are passed, right? And of course, people take those amendments and they twist them in ways to terrorize Black people. So it's like, that kind of thing doesn't necessarily exist in Brazil. It does have its racial hierarchies.
Absolutely.
Like, that can't be ignored. It's not a perfect place, but he might be looking at it as, look at what the hell happens in the United States. I mean, this 1920s is also the heyday of the Ku Klux Klan.
Absolutely,
man. We also can't ignore that stuff, too.
Yeah, Ku Klux Klan, man. The sequel is worse than the original in a lot of ways.
And obviously neither of us can relate to the Black experience, but we also have elements of our identity that kind of like, I kind of understand a little bit, just a hint of like what it's like to not be allowed to be yourself. You as a queer person, me as an autistic person, like being in lots of circumstances where you can't relax. Yeah. Like I can at least have a taste of what she's talking about, though I can never understand, the racial oppression and the sheer terror that went on.
Every minority status is different in its own way, and it has its different experiences. But I think if you allow yourself to like empathize and relate as even tenuously as you can, you're going to see, maybe just from your peripheral vision, how shitty it would be to be in that situation.
Well, and I think this book, what was so compelling to me is I've read a lot of books from a variety of diverse authors. I love Maya Angelou. I know I read The Caged Bird Sings, which actually could be a candidate for the podcast as well. It's a fantastic book. It tells you, Maya Angelou is a fucking genius, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But like, so you read it from the Black perspective. And then, of course, like, we're going to read Steinbeck. I've read other Steinbeck books. I haven't read The Grapes of Wrath. That's going to be our next episode.
Yeah.
But, I've read of Mice and Men. And to understand poverty, like, I understand poverty, especially, like, like, I've lived in poverty for a large chunk of my life. So I can understand those kinds of things. And the Black experience, like, in some ways is like a very clear category that you can read and understand. White is a very clear category you can understand, but this mixed area, I don't think I've ever read a book about that kind of gray, that liminal space of identity of the early 20th century.
Absolutely. And
I've never read a book like that.
One of the things about the Harlem Renaissance that's really like special and unique is that there are so many authors that came out of it that, like Langston Hughes, were mixed, and who could speak to it and wrote really eloquently and passionately about it. And the fact that none of that shit is taught in the canon, is like not included in schools in like a standardized way. The fact that this book isn't taught and The Great Gatsby is a fucking crime. The Great Gatsby is half the book that this is, maybe. The language is prettier and more eloquent.
She's definitely a better writer.
She's a better fucking writer. It's a jazz age novel about class, and why isn't it fucking taught?
Yeah. Well, yeah, when you said yesterday, we were hanging out and you said, this is a better version of The Great Gatsby. I was like, I didn't think of it, but it absolutely is. Like, you know, but I think that's the power of literature in general. It's like, if you want to understand the experience of others, you gotta read.
Absolutely.
And like, I love films and I love shows, and they do have opportunities, but there is something about being in the head of another person.
The interiority, absolutely.
The interiority.
Absolutely.
Even though Irene, in a lot of ways, that's another duality, is like, how much of this stuff is Irene's projections versus the reality.
Yeah.
And Claire very much like disrupts some of your ideas about like, maybe Irene is an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
Maybe she isn't really perceiving the situations. She's very depressed. She's very morose. She's kind of like, she's just really obviously struggling.
Yeah.
And so her perceptions may actually be incorrect.
I think that's right. And I think you actually get that kind of from the first chapter, well, not the first chapter, but like the first section of the book, when her husband drops her off, like on an errand, and she's trying to have a conversation with him about their son and how she thinks that the schools in their neighborhood are having a negative effect on him, which is a really interesting thing for someone who's like a black culture booster to have, but she wants to send him to a school in Europe. And to achieve that end, she's having a conversation with him, and he immediately clocks what she's doing, and he's like, what, are you just like, are you afraid that he's learning about sex?
Yeah,
like
he needs to learn about, he says something like, he needs to learn about the comedy of sex before it gets the better of him.
Absolutely, you know, and he's totally right. But she's, I think, trying to shelter her more white passing son from the like lascivious nature of Harlem or something.
Right.
And it's just another duality that's really fascinating in her character.
Yeah.
Because she takes umbrage when people like Jack describe black people as like lascivious and sexual, but that is clearly something she also thinks herself. And and the conversation goes really badly, and they end up having kind of like a brusque goodbye.
Yeah, she's like, I'm gonna go shopping.
Yeah, and he's like, okay, great, yeah, you know, he like pulls up to the curb, and she gets out and slams the door,
and he like drives off like nothing had happened, like, and she's like, that's like his middle finger to me.
Yeah, exactly. and then you know, in her head, she's like, oh man, I gotta like get back. I have to get him to forget about Brazil again. She keeps on chalking this up to Brazil.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's, man, now that we're talking about her being an unreliable narrator, maybe Brazil isn't a driving force in Brian's...
Well, he says right near the end of the book, he's like, you denied Brazil, and I'm trying to make a life for us here.
Yes.
Right?
But I also have to be honest with our children about what that will entail.
Right.
Yeah.
So, because the lynching thing comes up, and she's like, you can't teach our... And this is part of the whole passing thing. You can't... I want our children to be happy. I don't want them to be thinking about...
happy childhood.
I don't want them to be thinking about lynching. And he's like, but one of our children cannot pass... And
it was called the N-word on the street.
It was called the N-word on the street next to his brother who can pass. So, but I mean, this is my favorite line from the book, because it really encompasses everything, all the themes, everything. And it's Irene's kind of internal dialogue when she's thinking about, is her husband cheating with Claire?
Right.
And she says, she could bear anything, but only if no one knows she had nothing to bear.
Or anything to bear.
Or anything to bear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like this idea of like, that is passing right there.
That's absolutely what it is.
Right?
Yeah.
So she can bear it. She can bear Jack, the goddamn racist, like, and all of his terrible racial slurs, because he doesn't know that that she's black.
Yes.
So it's like, and then she can bear her husband cheating on her if he doesn't know that she knows.
Right.
So, or she can pretend to be happy, and that's what it is. It's pretend happiness when you deny your identity, and that's the struggle.
Absolutely.
That's the struggle for.
And she says she's doing it for the sake of her children, so they can have a happy childhood. But I think, as we know from our 100 years later perspective, that parents who are constantly at odds with each other about how their children should be raised and are not communicating in an effective way will not foster a happy childhood.
No. And also, I think, like, happy childhood aside, like, what is a happy childhood if it does not prepare you for the world either?
That's a very good point.
Right? As a parent of 4 children, like, if you do not give them truth and they have to find out the hard way later, it is like, I didn't find out, and this is not my parents' fault. This has to do with like society not knowing what to do with someone who's neurodivergent like me, who is essentially passing neurotypical in a lot of scenarios. I mean, unless you really know me, then you know I'm weird. But like this idea that like I spent my whole life like trying to be normal, and I'm not. Right. And I mean, of course, what's normal and all that, what jazz, but like, but it's like when you find this stuff out later, like when I found out, when I was like, oh, I'm autistic, you go through severe depression and anxiety and all of this stuff. And that's essentially what she's setting her child up for.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the world she's living in herself.
Yeah. And that's why she's miserable.
Yeah. She is. Man, this all fucking goes back to Du Bois too, and The Souls of Black Folk. Yeah. Which is another great book. Not a fictional book, but a great memoir about growing up mixed race in New England. That like, if you don't belong to any clearly delineated category, you just have to live in the middle. Yeah. And not have a home anywhere. But if you can break down those strict barriers and just let everybody into the middle, it's going to be a lot happier. You're going to be a lot happier. And so, like, if you accept the fact that your children are mixed race and one of them can pass for white, one of them can't, and you have to give them both the education, like, this is what it's like. Like, because her son who can't pass for white is definitely not going to be welcomed in, like, poor black society, right? Because he's middle class, and people will clock that immediately in the way he behaves. Behavior is just as much like a signifier of race and class and culture, all that as skin color is, and that's actually part of the discussion that happens with her and Hugh in the book too. God, this book, man, it packs a lot in a small container. It's crazy.
I finished it, was ready to like reread it right away.
I know.
I need to reinterpret this in another way.
Right? Her son both of her sons are going to be grappling with their identity for their whole lives, and not acknowledging that and not preparing them for that is definitely doing them a disservice. I do think she knows that, and I think that's why she becomes more and more clearly depressed throughout the course of the book. Yeah. At the beginning, you're just like, well, it's a hot day, and she's in Chicago, and she was getting kind of mobbed when that guy fell over, and everybody's like, did he die? Did he faint? And she just wants a little bit of relief and like to be alone in a peaceful place and like cool down and calm down. But looking at it now, I'm like, oh no, she is depressed and seeking isolation.
Yeah.
The whole fucking book, man.
Well, because she can pass in a lot of circumstances, she is in a lot of ways allowed to ignore the systemic racism and have a kind of sense of apathy. I mean, that comes out when she says, I just want them to have a happy childhood.
And when she walks away from that black guy who fell down on the pavement.
Yeah. And apathy is one of the greatest tools of power. Yeah. If you can get a sizable majority of your population to ignore the political system, to ignore the structure, you can continue your system of oppression indefinitely, right? Yeah. It's right back to Foucault, which we talked about, I think, in episode 1, probably. I mean, we'll probably bring Foucault all the time.
Yeah, Foucault comes up a lot.
But it's like this idea of like the systems of power, they want people who will police themselves. They want people who won't be impolite in polite society. They want people to not like do things talk about like who has more power, who has more wages. They want people to not discuss.
Oh man, she's actively reinforcing all that stuff.
Right. And the part of her knows that, I think, which is why she's depressed. And here comes Claire, who is like, she's had to, in order to survive her terrible circumstances that had to pass, and Claire wants out.
Yeah.
Like, that's the whole thing. And then I really do think she kills her. I do. And so
Yeah.
I think it's like Claire is a threat to her passing. It's a threat to her apathy, because Claire is not afraid. Claire is like flirting with danger the whole time. In fact, she says like Claire has a having way. She has, you know, what I have Claire wants, right?
Ooh.
But
She
then
has a having way about her.
having way about her. Yeah.
It's like that's a direct line from the book, and it's just like so succinct, and it says so much.
It says so much, and it's like, but you know, but then I think there's this sense of wild freedom in Claire, that she's trying to break free of the chains of all of her oppression. She's like trying to get out of the situation with her husband. It appears like she's really trying to sabotage that relationship without sabotaging it, because it's scary. It's really scary to like, it's got to be, again, I can't really understand what they were going through.
No.
But it has to be absolutely terrifying, because here she has this whole life, she has all this stuff, like, and she is surviving, and in a way Claire is thriving, but in another way she's deeply, deeply oppressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the moment when Irene asks Claire what will happen to her daughter, you know, Claire says, the only reason I haven't left yet is because of my daughter. But she says it in a kind of brittle way. And I think that you can definitely interpret that as her being on the precipice of some decision.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think it's definitely has to do with leaving Jack, but it also could be about, you know, just, you know, jumping off of something,
right,
or making a move and stealing her friend's mans. I don't know.
Well,
I don't know if that is a real threat, or if
it's an Irene threat.
An Irene interpreting it threat. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's never, and that's the brilliance of this book, actually, is that so much is not explicit.
Yeah.
Like, even the scene at the end where Claire dies, it's not explicit that Irene kills her. I think she did.
And I kind of don't.
And you kind of don't. And that's a valid interpretation, too.
I think so, yeah.
And that's the fun of literature, too, by the way. Right? You're like, when you have a piece of literature and you're, like, debating over what actually happened, that's when it's a really good book.
Just picking it apart and looking at everything, man.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I you know.
Claire's clearly desperate, though, because she does dangerous things throughout the book. Her life is precarious, like, to the point of absurdity, really. Like, I mean, she's fairly safe in her relationship with her husband as long as she can stand him. Mm-hmm. He's probably not going to find out that she's mixed race.
Well, he doesn't want to.
Well, that's very true.
Because he makes a comment. He makes a comment when you first meet him about how she keeps getting darker as she's getting older, but I know she's white. I know the truth.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So he's in, like, deep denial.
He has one piece of evidence, and that's her white aunts that he met one time. Mm-hmm. And
he doesn't want to see the truth.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And but as long as she doesn't flirt with danger, like go back to her old neighborhood, hang out with her old friends, or go to New York and hang out in Harlem, you know, she'd probably be fine.
But man, what would it be like to have to live with a man who utters racial slurs? It's not like he is, like, you know, apathetic to the whole situation. Right. It's not like he's like a man. He's like, well, I don't know what those people are doing over there, and I don't care. Yeah. No, he was like, I mean, you know, talking about essentially apartheid, right?
Yeah, he was talking about apartheid. He's like, man, it's great, you know?
Yeah. Like, I mean, and I just can't imagine to be with someone who hates a part of your identity so deeply.
Yes.
That... And to live inside that prison,
right?
That would be like, I can't. I mean, so I think, like, that actually makes me think that your suicide thought is even more valid than, like, because at first I was like, why would she commit suicide? But then thinking about it, it's like, yeah. I mean, actually, the idea that she is going to live in that prison forever, like, in this way, she gets to die in Harlem.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
She gets to die with her identity intact.
Absolutely.
Rather than having it torn apart. So maybe the suicide approach is a valid approach.
I can't imagine a bigger fuck you to somebody than they find out that you are the thing that they've always vociferously hated, and then you die there, kind of implicating them in the process, but more explicitly dying like on like the in the stronghold of black culture in the United States. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a dope move in a way.
It is.
I don't promote suicide, but like, you know, it's better than Gatsby's.
It is definitely better than Gatsby. Yeah. I mean, you know, I wasn't a huge fan of Great Gatsby anyway.
No, me neither. I mean, especially because he apparently ripped it off from his wife's book. Yeah. And they got her committed. Oh god, what a fucking asshole that guy is. Yeah.
But tangential.
Yeah. Not the point.
But it looks like we don't have any questions. Any final thoughts, Matt?
It was just I've been thinking about the queer subtext of the book a lot and how it was drawn out apparently in the movie. I would love to have watched the movie before we did this. I just kind of found out about it about a day ago.
Well, I found out a day ago because of you.
Yeah. But it stars Tessa Thompson as Irene and Ruth Negga as Claire, and Alexander Skarsgård as Jack, which I think is very telling casting. But the director apparently used the motif of mirrors a lot throughout the movie. I think also clearly drawing out that duality theme that runs so richly through the book, but also sort of excised a lot of stuff in an effort to highlight the queer subtext, or maybe just like actual text of the book through apparently longing glances and like focusing on Ruth's lips a lot, which I think is probably the director really picking up on the strong bisexual undertones of Irene's character, and really highlighting that because, you know, queer media definitely needs a richer body, like just like more. We need more of it in the media. But I know that Tessa Thompson is also bisexual, so she was probably very excited to explore that aspect of the character.
Which character did Tessa Thompson play?
Irene.
Oh, Tessa Thompson plays Irene.
I know. I thought originally that was weird casting, but like, as I thought about the book more, it kind of made more sense to me because like, you can just put Ruth in like you put her in a white gown and like a blonde bob, and she is going to shimmer. But like, the character itself is kind of like explored through the way Tessa was going to look at her, you know? And Tessa's just got such expressive, like her features are like, she can just do so much with so little. And
she's an incredible actor.
Incredible actress. And I think that was really interesting casting, but I do think that
also the best ruler of Asgard.
Easily, absolutely.
Easily.
But I think that excising the drama with the husband and making it a more psychosexual drama between the two women is an interesting way to approach the sort of sublimated themes in the book itself. I think the nature of Harlem and the nature of like having a like isolated black enclave in a majority white city at that point is more what Larsen was trying to get at, and the psychological complexity of passing itself.
Well, I also wonder if she would have gone a bisexual angle, if she would have been able to get published in the early 20th century.
Well, I think that Harlem was having such a moment that you could probably still get published if you had done that. Well, maybe not. No, that might not be right. I think she probably wrote as ferocious a book as she could get published in that moment.
Well, yeah.
To the point of she wanted to title the book nig, and they wouldn't let her, and that was a concession she had to make. So you're probably right. And almost all queer texts had to be subtext up until about
the 60s, 70s.
No, I mean, well, yeah, the 60s, 70s, but every time I think of having to do something subtextually instead of textual, I think of the X-Men and Chris Claremont's efforts to make the X-Men explicitly queer, as well as like he wanted them to stand in for every minority, and the X-Men office at Marvel would not let him do that, so he had to make it subtextual instead. And that was going on until, I mean, the early aughts, because all authors, every writer who understood what Chris Claremont was doing with the character of Iceman, and how he was definitely gay and in the closet, had to make it subtext until Brian Michael Bendis had Jean Grey out him in like 2012 or something.
Well, and then I was also thinking of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. There's the Jadzia Dax subplot. There's an episode where she encounters one of her former lovers from her former life. For context, for people who don't know, she's a species called the Trill, and the Trill have a symbiote, and so the humanoid host passes the symbiote from life to life, but the Trill takes all the memories and experiences the little symbiote from body to body, and so she's in like the little symbiote's in like the 8th or 9th incarnation, and one of the episodes is she runs into her former lovers, and it's kind of a forbidden love. The Trill are not allowed to have relationships across lifetimes because they're worried about all kinds of corruption and stuff. Oh. But it's a woman, and I don't remember. It's definitely the first on-screen kiss in Star Trek. Which Star Trek has a history of that.
Of crossing boundaries.
Crossing the boundaries, because they did the first interracial kiss on TV. Mm-hmm. I think it was the first public TV lesbian kiss. I think
what might be wrong. That happened?
It's like 90. I want to say it was like 94, 95.
That's before the L word, so that's definitely possible.
So, but also on a major broadcast network, right?
Oh, good point. Not
right. So because then
I think
right, and then you get so it was in the 90s, and it was hugely controversial at the time.
Of course.
It was like, we don't want Star Trek. I mean, they wouldn't say this. They can say it now, but they say we don't want it to be woke. But it's like Star Trek has always been
Star Trek was always woke, you guys.
As deeply anyway. So I think for sure, we're 100 years later and people are still like, oh, gay men kissing on screen, all this other stuff.
I'm confident that's half of what the MAGA movement is responding to.
Yeah.
Just not wanting to think about what boys would do together if they could.
And have forever.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I mean, what do you think was going on in those all-boys schools that a lot of them were
Yeah, man, Lord Grantham says it at the end of the 3rd season of Downton Abbey. He's like, oh, I don't care. Oh, man, you should have seen what we got up to at boarding school.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
All right, well, I think that just about wraps up our conversation about passing. Please, definitely, if you survive the whole episode, read this book. Hopefully we didn't spoil it for you. It is an absolutely brilliant novel.
We did do spoilers, absolutely.
And
but it's so good, just read it anyway. You're going to love it.
Yeah, get it for yourself. Have the experience. In fact, sometimes when you know the ending of a story, it actually means you can enjoy the nuance and complexity of a story.
I find that to be the case when I reread stuff.
That's why I reread stuff sometimes. I'm like, oh, I got through the story. Now I want to see all the little pieces, all the themes and symbols, and how the author put together in their very brilliant way, and all that stuff. So next time we're gonna read Grapes of Wrath.
Yep. Hold on, I got a copy. I can show the camera.
Yeah, I found a copy. It's like an old hardcover from I think it was 1960 edition or something.
Same.
So, yep. So Grapes of Wrath, which is obviously going to talk about. Maybe not obviously if you don't know anything about it, but it's about class identity during the Dust Bowl and the 1930s. So,
yep.
So we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Yeah, when was this published?
It was probably 30s or 40s.
I think it was the 30s. I think it was just after the Dust. 39. Okay. Yeah.